Good evening, everybody. My name is Lynn Skolnick. I am a former trustee of the Ethelbert B. Crawford Public Library in Monticello, New York. And it is my pleasure tonight to have a special guest. This is an author talk with Patti Posner, whose book, Growing My View from the Mountains, a Catskill memoir, was published this past summer. And just to let you know that if you do have questions for Patti, please put your questions in the chat. We'll talk for about an hour and then we'll have about a half hour for some questions. I'm going to tell a story, Patti. I don't know if you remember this story, but I first met Patti probably 45 years ago, maybe more. And we had some mutual friends in the South Fallsburg area, and we used to socialize on occasion. And one of those times when we were together, I mentioned to Patti that I was kind of yearning for some stuffed derma. And a few weeks later, Patti gifted me from the Brickman Hotel kitchen a platter of stuffed derma. And for those of you who might not know what stuffed derma is, stuffed derma, sometimes people call it kishka, was made, it was a mixture of some sort of grain, sometimes wheat, and it was stuffed into an intestine as a casing, much like a sausage would be. And by the 70s, when when the hotel made this for me, most people and institutions had moved over to synthetic or plastic casings instead of using the intestines. And but Patti's hotel still was using the real thing, and I was delighted. So we're lucky to have Patti here tonight. At any rate, what makes Patti's memoir different from a lot of other books that have been published about the Borscht Belt experience or the mountains is the fact that this is a kind of behind the scenes experience. She's not sharing information about guests who overindulged in the dining room, or hijinks when women were here during the week and their husbands came up on the weekends. Patti's is really from the heart, a story about what it was like being raised in a hotel and then raising her own family in the hotel. So, as I said, I would appreciate everyone staying muted. And if you have any questions, you can add them at the end, put them in the chat or add them at the end. So the first, I'd like to put this little discussion into several parts. And the first part is one that interests me. And that is the process, the writing process, Patti. I'm going to just switch over to speaker form. Patti, tell the audience what it was like. When did you first decide you had a story to tell, and when did you decide to tell it?
First of all, thank you for having me, and thanks to all my friends and hopefully new friends who are on the chat tonight, the talk tonight. Maybe we can go back to the stuffed derma at another time, because I have this visualization of how we made the stuffed derma. But it's not appropriate to start a conversation with, because
okay,
you don't know me that well. Maybe
fair enough.
So I don't know if you know David Gold, who was my high school and elementary school friend. And when we were 25, I don't know why he said this to me, but it was like, he said to me, "You need to write a memoir." And I was 25 years old. I said, "I'm in the story. I can't reflect at this time." But David planted a seed, and I let it sit. And David, every decade or so, would say, "Have you started it? Have you done anything?" And I would say, no, 35, 45. But when I was 50, I was able to begin. And I wrote a lot of the very personal things at that time. I don't think I could write that today because I'm so far away from it. It's like another human being inhabited that part of my life. And then when we moved to Weaverville, North Carolina, which is just outside of Asheville, I'm living in country roads and mountains, and I get to wave to people, you know? And so I started to think about like a day in the life. And that's how I began the part of the book that's about the hotel. And I just pretended a day in the life because I was living in the country. And then I just kept writing until it was done. And then I went back to David Gold, who helped me at the very beginning and at the very end. So I'm indebted to him.
So did you write at the same time every day? Did you just jot down things from time to time? What was your process like?
I don't know if I had a process, although I am very organized, but I didn't have a process necessarily with this. I think it was going back to David again. He said, make a list of what you would want to include in this. And then when we were living in Boca in Florida, I had a writing group, so I would write weekly for them. So something only for my book. I didn't write anything else for this group. And we would review and we would go over it. I would write several times a week for however long I could, could keep it up, if an idea came. And then I did the same thing here. I had a writing group, and then it became just two of us, my friend Barbara and I. And I would write when I was motivated. I would write almost every day when I was here, not so much in Florida, but here, yes. But I don't think I have a process. I'm more spontaneous with it.
Were parts of the book more difficult to write about than others? And the reason I ask this question is, in the book, you do reveal some difficult moments in your life. So did any of this information come more easily to you, or did you question whether to even put it in the book?
Well, I didn't question whether I should write it. And yes, I questioned whether some of it should be in the book and some of it's not in the book. But then I said, if I'm going to tell my story, then I have to include obviously everything that I did, because I needed the reader. And I guess because there's so much written about the guests and the bungalow, people who came to the bungalows and all of that, of this being a fantasy land, but it wasn't a fantasy land for me. Although it was fantastic, but it wasn't a fantasy. It was real life, and it was hard. And if I didn't include that part, then the story wouldn't be authentic. And so I thought for me to tell my story, I needed to put that in there.
Okay. And I think that most of the people sitting in our audience tonight, people love reading about things which they know. They love reading and recognizing people or characters that were part of our past. So would you talk, Patti, I know one of the things you talked about, at some point in the book, you talk about the duality of your life, the months that the hotel was open, the months that the hotel was not open. Let's go to some of the months when the hotel was not open. You mentioned walking up and down the streets of Main Street in Fallsburg and going into the various establishments. Who were some of the people in Fallsburg who most influenced your time here, your life at the hotel particularly?
Who influenced my life in Fallsburg?
Yeah.
I think what was the most influential was the community. so not necessarily individual people per se, but the collectiveness of the community, that we were this group. Like, I know Steve Altman is here. Hi, Steve. And like we go back generations, like our parents were friends, our grandparents were friends. His grandfather built our house, the same thing with other Pearlsteins. I talk about um David Gold. Our grandparents were good friends, you know, the Wieners, our grandparents were good friends. So it's this generational community of this cohesiveness of who we were. And that for me was the most influential of that. I belong to this place. It gave me an identity.
You mentioned going into Gold's drugstore for an A-cream with your dad. You mentioned going into Poppins. You
Mhm.
mentioned going into Malman's hardware store.
Right.
These were all places where you walked in and everybody knew your name.
Everybody knew my name, and I knew everybody's name. Like when I went into Poppins, I would run into the Wieners, and I would run into, the Golds and the Altmans, and just all the family, friends, and business associates, the Malmans, the woman that owned Trudy's. And there wasn't really a soul that I didn't know. Or when I went into the grocery store, if it was Dave, like Dave Stein's grocery store, his daughter Barbara was the operator. We didn't have dial phones until the 60s, I guess it was. And so and so I would walk in there, and I just knew everyone. If I went into the other grocery store, Eddie's, I just knew everyone and everybody. You just would wave to people. And I remember after I left, and I stayed away for a month, I was already in my 30s. And then I came back, and it was a shock to see Fallsburg. I didn't realize what it looked like. It was just a fantasy world for me of this beautiful place that I grew up in. And then I went to the little gas station in front of town. It was like a VEO or something, I think it was called. And I met Carla Mansfield there, and my daughter was there. And like, she had to take my daughter because I was busy reconnecting with people and waving. And that's what I loved and love so much about, and the cohesiveness of the community still exists. If I spoke to Steve after like 30 years, and we have all this connections. We can go back to a conversation. I spoke to Ira Gold. I can do that with people from the hotel. But town in particular was my place.
So the word family, you've used that often to talk about the community, but you also use the word family to talk about the hotel.
Mhm.
Not only your own immediate family that worked there, your dad, your uncle, but also the the employees of the hotel who also became your family.
Oh,
So let's talk a little bit, Patti. When you were young, what was it like growing up in a hotel?
oh, it was, and obviously I've been thinking a lot about this experience. It was unique. I mean, I had lobbies, not living rooms. I mean, everybody had a dining room, and it would be maybe 2, 4, 6 people. I had 600 people, you know. I had chefs and salad men. And, even when I was a little girl, I'd go into the kitchen, and I had this enormous kitchen. It was the size of a warehouse. We had soup kettles that you could swim in. And this was all normal. We had, and I say it throughout my book, and, I am spoiled rotten. um, but there was an enormity to my life, and it was fantastic. I mean, I, you know, I, the, and there were so many people in my life as a young child, who were staples, and I talk about a lot of them in my book. Particularly when I was a little girl, there were the Wallachs, and who Ben Wallach was the director of activities, and I grew up with his son. We're going to talk tomorrow. We're still close buddies. And Lenny Rich, who was the ran the office, and his son and I were dear friends. My cousins were there. And this was all before I became a teenager. So there was a man named Chubby Lenz who was the funniest human being on the planet, and I don't think anybody has ever replaced him. So there was this, again, this cohesiveness, and these people were my family. And then when I was 14, the Stricklers, they're on the call tonight. Thanks for being here, guys. I know them since I'm 14 years old. And they came, Larry was the director of activities, and he came, and I know you interviewed their daughter, Marcy, and they're my family. I mean, we speak once a month, twice a month, 3 times a month, unless there's a bulletin of some gossip that still every once in a while resonates from the hotel. And, so we have to connect. But this experience gave me a sense of diversity of people, but also this commonality and this community and this security also.
Patti, talk a little bit about your relationships with your family members, especially it appears as though you had an incredible relationship with your dad, a different kind of relationship with your Uncle Murray,
Yes.
and a very special relationship with your grandmother, as well as your mom. So talk to us a little bit about your recollections of whatever kind of warmth those relationships provided or took away.
Okay, that's a good question. So let's start with warmth. And I'll start because she was older with my grandmother. And I didn't realize until I started to write the book, the impact that she had on my life. But she was center stage to my childhood, and she was an incredible woman. She was smart. She was really funny. She was she was the matron of the kitchen. She was cheap as could be. I mean, it drove my dad crazy. She would, take the bread that came back and try to reform it, and didn't want the orange juice. If somebody, I'm assuming nobody took a sip out of it, she wanted to pour it back into the pitcher, but she was well loved. And Larry, what Strickler, the director of activities, would do a lecture probably every Monday, and he would take not a lecture, but he would take a tour of the hotel with guests that had just checked in. And at the end of the interview, the tour rather, there would be my grandmother under her pictures, like, oh, I didn't know you would be here. So she loved that, and she was well loved. My dad was her, I guess, middle child, and he was just an incredible human being. He was well loved by so many people. And when he passed away, which is now 15 years ago, I got incredible letters from people saying the impact that he had on their lives. The impact he had on my life, I'm looking at a picture of him now, was phenomenal. My mother was an agoraphobic and probably would have been diagnosed as mentally ill. And so he stepped in, and he was my mother and my father, which has made parenting for me a little confusing. But he was just a good man. He would tell you exactly what he thought. He was on the president of the Board of Education when I was in high school. So I was also the boss's daughter in the high school. But he stood up for students who were in trouble. He helped families come to this country. He gave the Lewarka family an opportunity, and they grabbed it and ran with it. He made a difference in a lot of people's lives, and an incredible difference in my life, particularly when I stepped into the kitchen, because I didn't know what I was doing. And, but he offered me this job. And as I write in the book, the only qualification I had is I was the boss's daughter. But he mentored me and he was good.
Just so that we can help the audience keep things clear, your father was Ben.
My father was Ben. Murray was his brother. They were business partners. Murray was a character, and I was very honest about Murray in the book. I mean, when I was a little girl, up until I was about 10, he was really fantastic. And then I became a teenager, and he wasn't so fantastic anymore. He was, I think, jealous that my dad had a child. I'm an only child. And he was harsh, he was tough. He was well loved and not very liked, if that makes a lot of sense. He, in his own way, and I write about this in the book, he was a womanizer. But in those years, it wasn't as it was. I mean, it's not uncommon now, but he had that certain 1960s, 70s kind of womanizing where, the women in the office and, would look up to him in ways that were not exactly feminist, if I could put it that way. But he was tough on me, and I quit. One day we had a big fight and I quit. I write about that in the book. But
do you think he was tougher on you because you were his niece, or that's just how he was?
So every year we would have a fight, and we would end up in his office. He would be sitting at his desk. I would be standing up looking down at him. And I remember one year, I said something to the effect, is that you're just jealous I was born? And he never answered that question. And by never answering, I knew he was.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And Patti, what about your relationship with your mom?
Oh, my mother was a sad woman. In her youth, she was very, very beautiful. I say in the book, she was a cross. She was like Elizabeth Taylor and Judy Garland. She had that look. She was petite and dark skinned, and a woman up from the 30s. But she had this secret. You'll have to read the book to find out what the secret is. But it really affected her, and she had some personal tragedies in our family. And I think that set her off into a deep depression, and she became an agoraphobic and kind of disappeared from my life from the time I was about 8 or 10, 11. And it she sort of just faded out. I mean, looking back, I think she loved me, but she was incredibly distant. And but she showed up again when my daughter was born, and she became this fantastic grandmother. But our relationship was very what would be the distant.
Was she ever involved in the running of the hotel at all?
Not really. I mean, if she were here, this is the story that she would tell. So she was married to my dad before my Uncle Murray married his wife, my Aunt Helen, and my Aunt Helen's niece is on the call. Hi, Jessica. And they had a big fight. There was that sister-in-law rivalry. And, my mother claimed, Helen threw my typewriter into the garbage, and I'm sure Helen had another story. And so she never really participated. My mother, even though she was an agoraphobic, that's my diagnosis, she was also quite charming, and in her youth was an entertainer and would sing on the stage and dance. So she spent a lot of time as a hostess in the dining room. She was good at greeting people, but she was never really involved. Like,
Patti, when you left the office and took over the kitchen ultimately, there could not have been very many women who were in that kitchen. if not in your hotel, in any of the hotels. And having worked in a couple of the major hotels as a waitress, I know the certainly the verbal abuse that most waitresses listen to on a daily basis. So when you took over the reins as a steward in the kitchen, what was that like? What did you have to learn in order to step into a job for which you had no real training other than that you were the boss's
That
daughter?
was it. That was it. I mean, and I was 26 years old. I've been thinking about that today. I said to myself, well, maybe I was 36, but I was 26 years old. I had no experience. I mean, I knew the kitchen, because as a kid I would eat in there all the time, and I'd go visit my grandmother, and I knew where the cookie cabinet was. But I remember walking in the first day, and it was like I had never been there before. I mean, it was larger, it was scarier. I had absolutely no idea how it ran. None. And
Patti, just explain what did the job of steward entail?
so it entailed running the kitchen, everything that my father always took care of firing people, which I was very grateful for. And he ordered all the meat, which is really good because I'm a vegetarian. Um, but I managed the kitchen. I did all the buying. I had to make sure that it was well run, that the menus were taken care of, that the chefs had everything that they needed. That
Were there books that told you, like the first time, how much tuna fish to order? I mean,
no,
how did you
there was
know?
nothing. That I don't, that, I guess my father must have had like a spreadsheet or something, but I remember
I
just
don't think there were spreadsheets in those
just
days.
no, not a piece of paper spreadsheet, not a there wasn't a computer spreadsheet. But I mean, there was a huge room downstairs, and so there were cans and cans, and it was very disheveled. And I remember that I had to I'm very organized, so I had to organize everything to department. It was really just luck. I would order what I thought I needed. So I would order, 10 100-pound bags of flour, the same with sugar, the same like 30 cans of oil. And then I know that eventually I understood that I had to have almost 10 cans of everything. I was safe, and and then I would, but I just really had to wing all of that and had to reorganize everything. And that was the easy part. The hard part, there was me. I was the boss. I was the boss's daughter. So, and I was the only one that I had to, that was above me was my dad, who was also my mentor and my teacher. But I had to learn how to manage all of these people. That was the hard part. And, anyone that worked for me in the beginning, and they will tell you, they have told me endlessly, because a lot of us are all together on Summers at the Brickman on Facebook. I had a terrible temper. And I felt that was my way of showing authority. And it was really ineffective. And my father used to sit with me and mentor me and, like find other ways. But he couldn't teach me how to do this as a woman, because it's different. And, there were 2 or 3 waitresses and
How
me.
so, Patti? I know that's a hard question,
It's a hard
but
question.
I think that you just hit on something when you said it was different for a woman.
Different for a woman. I mean, people like and not only was I a woman, but I was the boss's daughter. So like everyone knew I was coming there unqualified. So I had to, and I couldn't deny that. And then men are more respected, and this, I think it's true today. So I had to learn how to find my voice so that when I said something, they took it seriously. And I had to learn to do that without yelling. And as I said, my first way of doing it was to yell at people. But that didn't work. It affected everything. There was no harmony in the kitchen. So it was really a lot.
It's a life lesson too, though.
It's a life lesson. It really
Yeah.
is. And so I really had to like really come to know who I was so that I could expose that part of myself for managing all of these people. So because I needed to have more respect than a man would have needed and the boss's son would have needed. You know, there was that double whammy. And I have to say I found it, you know, and part of it I found it in my humor. And then I just I think this helped also is it was easier to manage the chefs because they had their assigned jobs and all of that. I just had to keep harmony in the kitchen, but I also wanted to keep harmony with the waiters, and I didn't want them doing more than necessary, like taking out 40,000 dishes instead of the 16 that they needed.
Yeah, but there's fewer trips to the kitchen then.
But there's fewer trips to the kitchen, but then you're serving cold food. And so
Oh, that matters. I see.
That matters. It mattered to me, you know, and you know, not to take out too much butter, just enough butter, or just a little more than enough butter. You know, I turned a blind eye on a lot of stuff. But like once I started to really gain confidence, and I think that's the word that I'm looking for, is I had to find my own sense of confidence. And then I had to let other people know that I was confident and that they needed to understand that I was the manager and I was going to do this. And I wasn't going anywhere. You know, I wasn't getting fired. You might have been. I wasn't. And, you know, there are some facts in life. And so I remember sitting down with the wait staff, which was mostly men. And I said, we have a choice. This is what I need done. This is, you know, we have to have good service, hot food, you know, this dining room, the kitchen has to run smoothly. So we can do this as a lot of fun, or I can be a bitch. You choose. And we chose fun.
You know, having worked in the hotels myself, those were some great years, and certainly we all understood that concept of a family that that comes about. Patti, you used a phrase earlier in talking about your grandmother. You said, I didn't realize the impact at the time. I want to just bring us back to that phrase. You mentioned in chapter 7 about you said this ephemeral nature of making acquaintances has left a lasting and positive mark on me. I'm very comfortable meeting people, dealing with what's in front of me, and adjusting to new situations. You talked in the book, Patti, about your friends lasted a week, and that when you first went to kindergarten, you expected there'd be another group of kindergartners the following week, just like there was always another group of campers the following week.
Right.
So what are some of those things, Patti, in addition to how much of an impact your grandmother had on you, sitting at, what was it, a pink table, formica table in the middle of the kitchen?
Yes.
You know, it just with all the hype about Barbie, this pink table seemed like it was retro and
there you go. I didn't think of that.
So what are some of the other life lessons? And I would urge you to share with our audience this evening that wonderful passage that you learned something about yourself and about the people that worked for you. If you would share that with the audience.
I'd be delighted to. There was one particular moment in the kitchen that transformed me. It was during the summer of 1977, my first full year as steward. I had some details to finish up and decided to do them after lunch was served. As I was relaxing in the quiet of the kitchen and savoring my lunch prepared by our chefs, I glanced over to the far end of the kitchen near the bakery and eyed a stranger. The way he sauntered around disturbed me. His unsteady gait complemented his unwashed Levi's and faded sleeveless shirt. A do-rag covered streaks of gray in his wiry black hair. He walked over to the Bain Marie near the rear entrance and was just about to spoon leftover meatloaf onto his plate. I motioned to James, a young black man who had worked for us for several seasons, to come over to my desk. He wore a heavy black apron tied around his ample waist that just about reached the top of his worn sneakers. James initially was hired as a pot washer. This year, he was the head dishwasher. James walked up to me smiling. "What's up, Patti?" "Please ask that man, that bum with the do-rag, to put down his plate and leave. He does not work here." James glanced over to the bum and then looked again at me carefully as he searched for the right words to say to his boss. "I will, Patti. I will ask him to leave when he finishes his lunch." With that, he turned around and walked back to the dishwasher he so skillfully orchestrated. As I finished my lunch, I saw James go to the bakery. He placed a few cookies in a paper napkin and wrapped them carefully. Then he walked over to the man and handed him the cookies. And then James told him to leave. His words, "I will when he finishes," pierced through my elitist arrogance, vaulted past my boss's daughter's status, meandered around my middle-class upbringing and white privilege, stopped for a minute to play with my inexperience, and landed in a place unfamiliar to me. I have never forgotten James or the man. I wish I knew his name. This was transformative for me. I was, and I still am, spoiled. I grew up in a resort hotel with cooks, a chef, and menus. I never had to think about where my next meal was coming from. It came from the kitchen at the hotel. My choices were endless. I had asked the salad man to make my favorite salad on this day, and he did. I was the boss's daughter, and saying no to me was not on the menu. But it wasn't until James said, "I will when he finishes his lunch," that something shifted inside me. James knew what it was like to not have the security that I had. My eyes were opened.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Patti, there's several instances in the book, and more than several instances, a number of them, where you talk about the fact that you led a life of privilege, that as a single mother, you didn't have the same problems that the typical single mother has. Your daughter always went to camp. She always had something to eat. There was always someone around to take care of her. So what were some of the other life lessons, in addition to the one I read as our kind of entree into this? What are some of the other life lessons you recall in retrospect? I'm sure at the time you weren't aware of them.
No.
What were some of the other ones that you feel that you have learned and that have allowed you to understand your own life better now?
Yeah. Wow, that's deep. It like what I just read, like that moment was, I learned that in an instant. Like I didn't need even to process it. I just kind of, something just clicked. And like that just gave me, I was able to see our staff differently. I mean, clearly I was at the top of the hierarchy of the hotel, and I came to know almost in that moment that it meant nothing. That place that I was born into was really meaningless, that it was really who you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what you look like. It matters what you know and how you process this and how you bring it into the world. So I got to see like so many people that came, like the guests, okay, but I never got to see a lot of guests because I was in the kitchen for so many years. But I got to see people from all over the South, from all over this country, from all over Central and South America, that came, that their lives were so much harder than mine, yet they knew so much more than me. And so I paid attention to them. And what could I learn from them? And then my father was very open and loving and accepting, and he was very helpful to several people. And I write about one family in particular of what he could do. Like he could use his place in society to welcome this family and give them a home, and they had a home on our property, and and so he gave them that American experience. And so I got to see people that I wouldn't come to know as real human beings. And I think that many people are missing that because they don't have that. Like if that was the luxury of my life, that was it. The comfort was one thing, but wow, this was an education. But I also got to know, obviously, how to manage, how to organize, how to get what I want. Like when you're running a business like that, you need to get what you want because you need to get certain stuff done, and you learn how to get it done. And you also learn how to make a decision a snap, because there's no time to process. If something happens, if somebody dies at the hotel, if a waiter slips and falls. I mean, I was remembering last night that there were 3 waiters that walked out of the kitchen, and they all had like a 10 or 12 mains of spaghetti and meatballs, and then one went down, then another went down, and then another went down. And so you have to learn how to take care of all of this in an instant. You can't like think, and you can't like ask for help. I mean, you can ask for help, but you have to delegate. You can't. And so you learn all of these skills of how to get along in the world. You learn how to get along with people. You learn how to get along with yourself when you're managing, or at least I did. But for me, the biggest part was living and learning from all of these people. It was a big gift. It was better than a college education. And
Patty, you and I have talked about questions I might ask you, and because you served on a panel we had at the library a few years ago, we have been in contact over the years. A few years ago, I read Myra Young Anderson's book about I think the title is Seeking Their Fortunes in the North.
so, yeah.
And in that book, she mentions the Brickmen a number of times as being kind of in the forefront of hiring African Americans, many of whom, through the Great Migration had come north.
Right.
I was shocked to read in her book, I think the date, she said that the first African American that served as a waiter in the regular dining room was either 1970 or 1971.
Mhm.
That prior to that, they may have worked as dishwashers or porters in the hotel, but never in the main dining room. Were you aware at the time that the Brickman was ahead of its time in that regard? And someone just reminded me that it was Myra Young Armstead, not
Right, you're correct.
Anderson.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Right. I wasn't aware because it was just normal. Like it never occurred to me that my father's views on blacks or gays was out of the ordinary. We had a lot of black men and some women that worked at the hotel. and I like to think that he treated everyone fairly. I know that I believe it was in Myra's book, that my father was the first one to get a Black woman a job as a secretary and not as a maid. So it was just normal for me to, he was just that kind of person. And I've told this before, but one of his best friends in the 30s was Leon Laverty, who was a drag queen. And so I don't know, and then I remember when I was working and when I was a steward in the 80s, we had a lot of Black men, many of them were gay. And nobody really cared. I mean, and everybody, you did a good job, you stayed. You were a good person, you stayed. You didn't do a good job, you didn't.
You mentioned a phrase, and I'm not sure I'm going to have this. I have this memorized correctly. I wrote it down, but I'm not sure how accurately. You said, "Treat the help. Treat if you treat the help, they'll treat the guests. If you have happy guests, you have better business."
Correct.
So there was this feeling that when I worked at the hotels, I didn't always think that my happiness was considered at all.
I mean, once I got over my angry period, yeah, I mean, if our waiters were happy, or then our guests were happy. If our guests were happy, they would come back next year. They would pay us. I mean, it's because I think any business, what they have to offer is customer service. No matter where you go, if you're treated well, you'll come back. So if your staff, first of all, it's the right thing to do is to treat your staff well. I'm a big advocate of that. But if you
treat people well,
you treat people well, and they are people. So if you treat all of your staff, not just the staff that's public in the, the women who work at the front desk or what people can see. But if you treat your staff, the ones that are behind the scenes, the ones that aren't, if you treat them the way you should treat them, which is well, then I think you have a well-run business. And I think once you have a well-run business, then your customers are happy and they will pay their bill. They will come back the next year. You have a successful business. I mean, the bottom line is money. But the bottom line also is treating people well, not only just treating the guests well. And I wish I had done even better, like I think now I see like on our Facebook, oh, it's somebody's birthday. Well, if I had known that, we could have had a little birthday cake or something. But I think treating people well is essential. And I think treating your staff well is really important.
Patti, during the course of your book, you mentioned several revelations that came about, information that you never knew, and I'm not going to reveal that so that people read the book and they'll find out what they are.
Right.
Patti, why do you think that your parents, that our parents, our generation of parents, made the choice to keep certain information from us? I don't think that was unusual at that time.
That's a good question. I don't even know if I can answer that. And I wonder if we still are honest with our children all the time. Do we tell them? And then, so The Secret in my family, I think a lot of it had to do with the times of what was acceptable for women, and so women had to sort of live this facade of who they were. But I wonder if it's not uncommon in this day. Do we really know our parents? Do our children really know us? And then are they interested, like my interest in my parents, I became more interested in who they were after they passed, or when, but I don't have an answer. I don't know why. I think in my case, my mother felt that her lie would have not been accepted because of societal views on women and marriage. And I think that probably has a lot to do that people lie to see if they can conform to, particularly then, what society had to offer.
I'm sure you remember to this day learning about these two specific incidences.
Correct.
Um, how did you feel at the time when you did learn, when they were revealed to you? And
Well,
one not so, you can go ahead and mention if you want to, the schoolyard taunt.
yeah. I mean, I could draw you a picture of it. That's how real it is for me. I can close my eyes. I can see my elementary school. I can see the swings. I can see Cliffy Oretsky. I can see my girlfriends. I can see standing there. I can hear the words coming out of his mouth. It's very, very real. And it was in the moment, it was very disturbing. But now it's 60 some odd years ago. But I do remember when my daughter was young and there were some secrets, and I told her them. And I remember, like, when I told her the secret, she just relaxed. And then when she was getting her master's in psychology, one of the projects that they had to do was to unmask secrets, and every student had to go back into their families and find and ask their families for their secrets. And we didn't have any. So
Okay.
it skipped a generation.
Patti, I'm going to ask you a twofold question here, and maybe it'll help you. One will help you prepare the other. The question is going to be this: what are three memories from the hotel that you are most proud of? And what are the three of which you are least proud of? Or
Oh,
least proud?
three memories that I'm most proud of. I'm very proud of how I ran the kitchen. I am. I'm very proud that, considering all of the family dynamics, that I came out as sane as I am today. I don't know if my daughter will agree, but I agree. And then I'm proud of the connections that I've made with people, particularly the Stricklers are here today. But even like my old friends, that we could just reconnect even after so many years.
So easily after all those years.
Easily. And I think that I can connect today with people even though they don't share that experience, because of the experience that I had at the hotel. And the second part of the question was what I'm not proud of, or
Yeah, least proud.
least proud of. My yelling when I first started in the kitchen. I'm not proud of my second husband in that relationship. You'll have to read the book to get the details on that, kids. And let's see. Least proud. I can only think of two. I'll have to get back to you on the third one.
Well, if there's only two, then you're a lucky woman, I guess.
Or I'm delusional, one or the other.
Patti, are you continuing to write?
Oh, I write all the time. I write all the time. I do. I haven't started a new project yet. But I have thoughts in my head for something when I'm in my 80s.
Okay.
It's called 87 plus. So I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah. On the occasion of my father's 80th birthday, I wrote my 80 favorite memories of my dad.
Ooh, I like
and gave that to him as a birthday present. And I was shocked at how quickly those 80 memories surfaced.
Yes.
And it was a fun experience. And I'm glad I did that. Patti, before I open this up for questions from our audience, is there anything about you or your book that you had hoped I would ask and I did not?
Oh, you really covered it all. I mean, because most people when I do an interview, they don't talk about, just so important to me, the people who work for us, who were the waiters and the busboys and the pot washers and the dishwashers and the maids and the garden people and all of that. But you touched on that, and that's really important to me because I want the story of the Catskills to be complete. I know that it's a lot about vacationers and bungalow people, but I want that story also to be told as much as I want my story to be told of what it was like to be in the position that I was lucky enough to be in.
And the truth is, for those of us who work the hotels, working the hotels and vacationing in the hotels were not the same thing. And it's a very different experience that we all had.
Right. Although our waiters, because for the last 10 years that we had the hotel or so, we had 2 meals a day. We had breakfast and dinner. So our waiters called it a station with a vacation.
Oh, you did mention that. You had gone on to a modified American plan at the hotel?
Right. So
and why did you do that, Patti?
My dad and uncle made that decision. I think it was a good decision. I think they wanted.
And you were no longer kosher in those days?
Oh no, we were kosher. We were always kosher.
But not in the coffee shop.
Not in the coffee shop. But we did it to modernize, to see if we could get out of that to broaden our audience, so that we could maybe go beyond just having a Jewish clientele, but to having a more mixed cultural clientele and have more business.
Okay. It's funny. I former teacher, I over prepared. I have about 100 questions I haven't even asked you. And I'm not even sure, because some of the questions led to another question, if I even got to half of them. But I would like to open this up now to our audience. And you are more than welcome. Not many of, actually, I don't think anybody has put anything in the chat. So if you do want to ask Patti a question, I am going to attempt by myself to single-handedly call on all of you. So if you have a question, if you either put your hand up or put a hand up in the chat, I will try to get to you. So you can unmute yourself. If we become unruly, I'll ask you to mute yourselves again. But and I'm not sure, are you able to unmute yourselves, or have we taken that away from you? Let's see. Okay, I see Shelley and Larry, you were able to unmute yourself. Do you want to ask Patti a question?
I wasn't thinking about a question, because we know Patti so well.
She knows they know the answer to everyone.
But I do want to say that we have heard many of Patti's interviews, and I want to say this has been the best. I feel that you have gotten to the crux of what Patti's book is about. Now, what's so interesting to us is that when we met Patti, just think about this. She was 14 and we were 3. And it is so many years since then. And yet, to talk about what it was like, the relationships at the hotel, that all of these years we had never departed from being really close family. And my daughters, my 3 daughters, who it's funny, we are like 9 years older than Patti, and my daughters are about, right, Patti, it's about 10 years younger than Patti.
No, 13.
And yet, 13? Oh, and yet we all have this incredible, warm, touching, familiar relationship it is family. I know it sounds like a cliche, but the hotel allowed that. Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
What is so amazing is that you work in a place where Murray Posner and Ben Posner are, and Joe, and it was wonderful. I've never ever thought that I would ever give it up.
And Ben.
I loved it.
And Ben, I mean, Ben and Murray, but Murray, as Patty says, was a character. Ben, as Patty says, was simply the most wonderful role
Yes.
model. He taught you a lot, Larry, right?
He certainly did.
And just the way he was, we used to call him the boss, but in a very loving, pleasant way. You know, Ben was the back guy. He was the one who really a lot of people in the guests didn't really know. Murray was the one who was out front, and he was with the entertainment, and he was out there and he greeted the guests. Ben was quieter, but Ben was the glue because he kept everything in the hotel running in the back. And we knew that. And I'll tell you, Patty, one of my best memories of, is your father in the barbecue, man. Boy, did he make those hamburgers, right?
This is true. Thank you. And I mean, they're my family, but there is
We
family.
loved him.
Yeah, there is.
Is there,
I love
I don't
you.
want to prevent anybody else from getting in. Did somebody else want to say anything? And if not, Shelley and Larry, you're more than welcome to go on.
Well, you know,
Patty,
there's
can
one
I-
person.
You go, Shelley.
I was just going to say, there's one person that you didn't mention who is part of our group.
Mel.
Triumvirate. I don't know how
Mel?
many of you might know him,
Who
but
are you
Mel
Oh,
Simon.
Mel Simons.
And we were like a trio in the hotel, and we were mischievous. And to this day, we still are. And
Still
Mel
are.
was the MC of the hotel, and he was also the singer.
During the
and
summer.
pianist. Tell it, Patty, about how he sang outside the dining room.
Oh,
Mel.
Mel was great. So he would, and there was another woman, Rochelle. It was the four of us. And
May she rest in peace.
may
yes.
she rest. And Mel would after dinner, he would sit at the piano in front of the dining room, and 50 people would come around him, and he
Lunch
would
and dinner, after
he
lunch
would,
and
do-
dinner.
he would sing songs, and the people would sing along with him, and he did that that was part of his job. But he was fantastic. I mean, Larry and Mel created an atmosphere of the hotel that was joyous and fun, sometimes frivolous, a little bit chaotic sometimes, but wonderful. But I would like to, there was in the 1930s, the hotel was founded by the Brickman family, and in the 1930s, the family fell apart. And my grandmother never saw her siblings again, and her nieces and her nephews. And then about 20 years ago, a young man contacted Jessica Shine, who's on the call tonight, thinking she's my cousin, but thinking she was part of the Brickman part of the family. But she got Eric to get in touch with me. She gave him the information, and Eric is on the Amran, he's on the call tonight, and because I see his name. And Eric united in 20 years ago, Eric, all of the Brickman cousins. And so from 1937 until the 30 years, the Brickmans were divested all over the country. And now we're all close families, thanks to Jessica, who got Eric to introduce all of us back together again.
Patty, let me ask you a question about that. Do you think that is unique to your family, or do you think that is more a function of our generation? We're all in approximately the same age, that as we age, we want to experience our roots more, or feel we have roots more, or family?
Well, I think I don't know why, Eric, what prompted, and Eric, if you want to unmute, you're more than welcome to. I haven't seen your face yet. We've never met. But I think some people are just very interested in keeping family history, and others aren't. I definitely think as you get older, you're more reflective. And then I think
We have
sometimes
more time. We're not working.
we're not working, or we're starting to lose our parents, and then we realize how short span it is. So we almost become interested too late. which is ironic, but I was very grateful
Yeah.
that Eric was interested at such a young age to put the Brickman cousins back together again, and we're all close.
Hey,
Nice. Stephen,
Mhm.
you unmuted. Did you want to ask a question?
Well, Patty warms my heart all the time.
It's so good
But,
to see
you
you.
know-
I haven't seen you in years.
I'm still good looking, right?
You are.
But it reminded me, it was a golden era. And I was amazed as a child. We would go to a restaurant in Monticello or one in Liberty, and everybody knew each other because we were all connected because we were economically connected. You know, Mountain Candy was a supplier to concessions in bungalow colonies and rooming houses and hotels. And Patty's family and my family was so connected, and our mothers were friends. It just warms my heart, those golden days that are gone. You know?
Yes. But we all understand, and it's interesting because those of us who grew up in Fallsburg, we have this connection. And I don't know if we can really put into words what we had and that we still, on some level, still have. Like, I don't exactly have the words that tell me why I feel so connected to, like, Steve Altman or David Gold or Ira Gold or Ellen Bresky, or just people that were part of our community. It's hard to understand. It's hard to explain, and it's also hard to understand.
hey guys, can you guys?
Eric, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, is my mic working?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I didn't prepare any speech or anything. Obviously, I dressed for the occasion, but with that kind of introduction, you know, here I am. Hi, Patty.
Hi.
You've seen photos, but yes, this is the
This
AI
is-
version talking.
Right, and this is my AI version.
Yeah, well, first, real quick, as I've told Patty in 100 emails, Murray had a huge impact on me as a kid when he'd come to visit. His sense of humor, I mean, I don't know him as a, you know, boss or co-worker. He was just a hilarious would-be comic, as Patty's told me. So, yeah, all that to him. But obviously, I have a real strong connection to the Brickman. Kate was my grandma. But like Patty, the young man crap. What do you mean? I wasn't a young man when we got in touch. I mean, that's very flattering, but we're really more close to the same generation.
How old were you when you contacted me for the first time?
Well, I mean, if it was 20 years ago, I mean, I was you know, pushing 50.
Okay,
So
that's
I think most people on this call would take 50 in a second. So I'll give you that, right? Yeah, I'm good with 50. But no, you know, you get to a point where you look back and your roots are important, and like Patty, community means a whole lot. And I think that's why we have such a fondness for history. Ours happens to be really rich and unique and worth talking about. But it's hilarious to have heard all of this this presentation and people's other comments. You know, I didn't think I would have any bandwidth here, so I'll just shut up. But this is an incredible show. You know, it's very personal.
Eric, I'm sorry. What was your connection to Patty?
Oh, my grandmother is Kate Brickman, who was Anna Posner's daughter.
No, Anna Posner's,
Anna Posner, I'm sorry, Anna Brickman
Anna
Posner.
Brick, my grandmother's niece. So we go back generations, like
Yeah,
his great grandparents and my great grandparents were siblings. Well, we share that. They weren't siblings. So we're like second, third cousins, and yet we share this history, and we have been very connected for, as I said, the last 20 years or so.
yeah, and despite the big feud, you know, in the family, my mom would go because she had the same experiences as Patty, except only from the summers when she was stowed there while her folks were working. And so she had the summer experience. and didn't, as was a young girl, so she didn't work. But Marie was her favorite. Marie took her in like a little sister. They were like this. That's why I got to know Marie. So she had a couple visitations and she brought her kids. I was at the Brickman twice as a little kid, and both occasions were extremely remarkable and memorable. And like a first
Nice.
crush, you know, being a bit of a rebel, you know, and disobeying authority and hearing the New York accent for the first time. So, you know, so all these kids were at the, wow, it starts young.
But yeah, Eric's grandmother was my grandmother's niece. And my grandmother hadn't seen her in 37 years. And Kate, his grandmother, came to visit my grandmother a week before she died.
Yeah. You were there to see it.
It was something. I write about it. Ah,
And
Anyone else? Stephen?
Patty's father was like a father figure to me. You know, I would meet him in the post office and he would follow me to my office. He didn't like how I opened the mail. And he would bring me letter openers and I would thank him, but I never used them. You know? And I think when I was 10 years old, my parents and my brother and I stayed in Murray's house in Miami. And it became a point that Murray asked my parents to leave because I was destroying the house. You know? So Murray thought I was the devil, and Ben thought I was an angel.
Do you think there's any other brother teams that think the same thing, Stephen?
Say that again?
Are there any other local brother teams that have similar feelings about you?
No, I'm not going to.
You don't have to answer.
I'm not going to incriminate myself with an audience, you know.
But this
I
goes.
think it, go ahead, Patty.
Oh, you go. You're the hostess.
I just think it's interesting that Stephen remarked on how something that you did earlier about how the community was family to everybody, and that,
Right.
you know, Murray or Ben was telling him how to open his mail properly. That there was that kind of a feeling that people could tell someone else's kids what to do.
Exactly.
I think that was just how it was in those. Yeah.
There was
I'm
a
sorry, Patty,
safety
go ahead.
walking through the village. You knew it was
Right.
perfectly safe. Everybody knew you. It's not like that in South Fallsburg now, but being involved
Or anywhere else, probably.
being involved in my industry and knowing people in my distributors all around the country, I often say to myself, I could drive across the country and break down and know I have a friend because I knew
Anywhere.
distributors in every city in this country.
Sure.
So
And-
it was like that. It was an amazing time.
Yeah, and like every Friday night, people would go to Bernie's restaurant in Rock Hill, New York. And my father would walk around and he would visit all of his friends and he'd take a French fry or something off their plate. I mean, and not everything, you know, and like, you know, it goes back to your original question of this community that we grew up in that had nothing to do with the hotel necessarily, but this was the other half of our life, which was, you know, part of the duality of my life was being a local and being the boss's daughter, but being a local was really incredible. It's an incredible experience.
Is that where my brother learned to eat off other people's plates from your father?
Probably. Of course.
Patty, one of the questions that I did not ask earlier, you mentioned in the hotel, there were so many characters who had unusual names. I wrote some of these down. You had Chubby and Rocky, and in those days, did we put labels on people? I'm assuming Chubby was not thin. I'm assuming Rocky, where'd that name come from? But they were all a cast of characters that made up what the hotel was and became.
Right. Like I don't, well, Chubby came to the hotel way before I was born, so he was Chubby, but his name was Abraham Lenz. Rocky, I don't know how he got his name, but his name was Oscar Schwartz.
Okay.
But Murray used to like to make up names for people, like if you had too big a name, like then you became, he just shortened it to something that he felt was manageable. He gave you a stage name.
And it was usually something that had to do with your character or your
or
appearance or.
simplicity, I mean, he was pretty creative with it, but I can't right now, I can't remember. I know there was,
Okay.
well, we had Larry, Shelley and I had our own names for people, but I can't discuss that on camera.
Okay. Stephen, the other Stephen there, you unmuted. Did you want to ask a question?
No, I just a little bit of memory. Patty and I were classmates, but
Hi,
you know,
I
at
haven't
the
seen you in years. Hi.
long time.
Long
But
time.
all the hotels used to start renovating or making them new buildings, and it was just right after the high holidays. And I remember my father had a job, I think it was with Joe Kraft, and and your father was taking us through the kitchen, and he says, "Remember, you have to eat something before you go back to work." And I think he did that to a lot of places. And I just think, and the other thing is, each town had their community. And I grew up around Loch Sheldrake, but the thing is, if you decide you can work in any community, but if you lived from one community to the other, you weren't really accepted. You could be 80 years old and you still weren't accepted because you didn't go to school there, or you didn't do anything with the rest of the group, so it was always a little history of, and the other thing, the last thing I just want to say is, people from large cities never understood the communities that we have. We had, like, over the years, we knew so many people had passed away, and we would say to people, "Oh, we have to go to a funeral or calling hours," and they said, "We don't do that." I said, "Yeah, but it's the community. It's people we know. We have to show respect for the people we knew growing up." And we did. And big city people sometimes just didn't accept or didn't understand what we did in our communities to show respect to the people we knew. And Patty, thank you for all this. I didn't get your book yet, but it's on order.
Thank you, Steve.
And we have all kinds of experiences. I mean, your grandmother in the kitchen reminds me another story of the mother of from the Pine View Hotel. She made sure that you didn't walk away with the herring. So it was just she sat there, and everyone was afraid of the mother sitting in the kitchen because you couldn't get away with anything. So there's a lot of stories out there, a lot of good stories, interesting ones, a lot of memories. And I want to thank you again for writing your memoir.
Thank you, Steve.
I think it's going to be great, and it is great, and I'm going to definitely read that as soon as it comes in the next day or so. So
thank you, and thanks for
It
showing up.
it won't help with sales, but you can also get it at the library.
There you go. That's fine. That's fine.
Something about the butter, because I know the Mayschwai did the same thing. I know the Tom Butcher did the same thing.
They all did. They all did.
And my grandparents, my father's parents, they had two hotels way back in the 40s, and one was even back in the 30s. And I'm still trying to find out where the one is located, and I can't find it. So it's maybe I should get a hold of John Conway, and he's got all this information.
Or Steve Kunis. Steve Kunis has a wealth of information.
Oh, okay.
It's
What was
scary.
the name?
Well, it was the Miller Gap House, which was in Loch Sheldrake on Hasbrook Road, and that was the last one he had. And then there was one before. He was partners with I think Friedman. It was called the Bell House, and I have pictures of that hotel also. So it's we've had in all of Sullivan County or South Fallsburg or wherever, there were more hotels in this area than there ever been in, I think, any other place in the world. There was like 200 hotels or more, rooming houses, bungalow colonies. I mean, you had everything that need to be for people to enjoy themselves.
So Patty, I just remember a story, that, the piece of property, across the street from, the hotel or down towards the light,
Mhm.
that the Kunis's had a farm.
Right,
And I have a book, I don't, a lot of books on the Catskills, but in one of the books, Kunis, I guess it's Bobby Kunis's grandfather,
right.
told the Posners when they turned the farm into a hotel, you made a big mistake, which of course is the opposite happened.
Is the opposite. It was the opposite.
Right.
The land wasn't great for farming, is that correct?
That's correct.
That's
by
why there's so many
That's
chicken
why they,
farms.
right, that's why, all of these hotels became, but this was the second property. So by the time they bought the Brickman, it was decided it would be a resort and not a farm. But my father grew up with cows,
Right, there were cows and chickens.
right, and I grew up with guests.
You had heard the guests.
Yep, it's eating time again.
That's true. Any other questions for Patti about the book, about the hotel? Well, Patti, I really want to thank you for joining us tonight and sharing your story with all of our friends here, and to congratulate you. You've done something I've always wanted to do.
I'll do
I know
it.
I still have time,
I have time.
but it's writing is something I've always wanted to accomplish. So you're my hero.
There you go. But if I can thank all of my old friends, I see so many names here, my new friends, I see a couple of tennis buddies and friends from the hotel. So it was really, old and new friends. Just thank you for coming and listening, and hopefully you enjoy my book.
I sure did. Thanks, Patti. Thanks
Great.
all of
Thank
you for
you,
joining
Lynn.
us. And on
Bye,
behalf
everybody.
of the
Hi, Dan.
Ethelbert B. Crawford Public Library, I thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thanks,
Larry,
Patty.
Shelley.
So long.
Bye-bye.